This video will show you how to replace the front lower control arm on a Subaru Outback. This is part of your front steering and suspension, located behind your front wheel. A quick note about installing this arm, it does have the ball joint attached, but it will still have to be torqued. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. We'll remove all 5 of our 19mm lug nuts. If you have a locking lug nut, you're going to want to make sure you have that key. Since mine does have the locking lug nuts, I'm going to be using that first. We'll just turn this until it feels like it wants to seat. Once it does, go ahead and turn that counterclockwise to remove it. We'll be using a 34mm to remove our axle nut. I like to do this because we have to maneuver the knuckle around and we don't want to cause any damage to our front CV axle. We'll use a hammer and punch directly in the center of the axle to break it free from our wheel bearing. Once you do have movement from that, we can continue on. Now we have movement from the axle. We're focusing in along this area. We can see our lower control arm. The lower ball joint is attached to the steering knuckle. The brand new lower control arm comes with the ball joint, so we're removing the ball joint from that steering knuckle. Now with that said, let's remove our 14mm mounting bolt holding this in place. A thorough inspection of the mounting bolt. You want to make sure you clean it up, make sure it's not rotted, weak, or damaged in any way. If it looks like it is, you want to replace it. Now that we have the bolt out of there, use some penetrant inside of the bolt port and along this small grooved area right along here. Now the steering knuckle actually has 2 ears that were squeezed together with that pinch bolt. We need to carefully separate those just enough that we should be able to slide the ball joint out of the steering knuckle. We don't want to cause any damage. Just use a small pry bar, we'll lightly tap it into place. Once it does spread those ears, we'll attempt to remove that ball joint from the knuckle. Now I'm using a large pry bar. I'm going up against the knuckle and prying against my lower control arm. If you find that you can't pry this out of place, you may have to tap on it with a hammer, or if you have an air hammer, you can do that as well. Now we're focusing on the hardware, holding our control arm to our subframe next. We'll start just behind the power steering rack and inner tie rod end. In this area, we can see the forward portion of our lower control arm. We have a 17mm headed mounting bolt making its way from the rearward portion of this through the bracket, through the control arm, and out through the other side, just underneath our inner tie rod end. Behind here, there's a 17mm mounting nut. We'll hold that mounting nut, and then we'll continue on removing the bolt. Now I always like to leave this bolt inside of the control arm. We don't need to remove it yet. We will be once we get the rearward hardware out of position. So let's make our way that way next. Now as we make our way to the back here, we have 2 19mm headed mounting bolts. One's going to be larger than the other. On the outboard side here, we have one that goes through the subframe, goes through the bushing bracket, and then up along the top. There's a 19mm mounting nut. We have the same exact thing on the inboard side, but that mounting bolt is just a little bit longer. 19 on the top, 19 on the bottom. Now what we have to do, since this is going to be under pressure along the backside, we're going to take hold of our knuckle and we'll just go ahead and start pulling it forward. That's going to release pressure from the lower ball joint where it connects to the knuckle. This should pivot as necessary so we can remove that bolt. There we are, that slid right out of there. Show you what it looks like. There's that one. And this is the outboard one. So as you can tell, the inboard bolt is considerably longer than the outboard bolt. Now we have that final mounting bolt that we already removed the mounting nut from. We'll have to maneuver things around so we can get that bolt out of there. Once we have it out, just keep in mind that's the last thing holding this control arm in place. We'll be sliding it out and away from the subframe, removing it from the vehicle. We got plenty of movement here. We're going to pull it straight out and away from the vehicle. You can tell that this forward side is tucked inside of the subframe. You can pry it if necessary. There it is, friend. Prior to installation of any brand new parts, we always like to make sure we clean and inspect all mounting areas. Your subframe needs to be clean and free of any debris on the mounting areas. We also want to confirm that it's not rotted, weak, or damaged, which can cause an issue. This area looks good. We'll make our way to the rearward mounting area as well. And then lastly, of course, down along the bottom of the knuckle, in the area that the ball joint's going to sit. It's common to have rust in this area. We're going to remove it. Little wire brush here. You can also use some sandpaper if necessary. We'll just double check to make sure there's no rust, rot, or miscellaneous debris. Go ahead and give that a rinse and a quick wipe. Little wire brush here. You can also use some sandpaper if necessary. We'll just double check to make sure there's no rust, rot, or miscellaneous debris. Go ahead and give that a rinse and a quick wipe. Perfect. Once we have that cleaned, we're going to use some anti-seize inside that port. Now it's time for installation of our brand new front lower control arm. Let's get this in position along our subframe first. Let's start getting this in place. We're going to slide it into the subframe along the forward area there. You may have to tap this into position lightly using a rubber mallet if necessary. Now our brand new control arm comes with new hardware. As you can see on my hardware, I like to apply some anti-seize to that shanked area, the smooth portion of the bolt. As far as the threaded portion, you can use some blue thread locker if you find it necessary. We'll make our adjustments on the forward side. We got our brand new mounting nut. Now we're not tightening any hardware yet. Let's continue on. Now it's time to align the lower ball joint with the steering knuckle. You should be able to maneuver the control arm around as necessary. We'll pull this down low enough that it makes its way underneath the knuckle. Bring the knuckle over into position. Once the ball joint looks as though it's aligned, we're going to carefully tap up on the control arm, bringing that ball joint all the way up against the knuckle. We're going to be using a rubber mallet for this. Now, as I was tapping that, you could hear an audible difference. I can tell that it's bottomed out, completely against the knuckle. At this point, it's time for our pinch bolt next. As far as that pinch bolt, you can see that I've applied copper anti-seize to the flat shanked area. Get that started in as well. Now, as far as applying pressure underneath the suspension, I'm making my way underneath the lower ball joint mounting nut And I'm using a small block of wood because the wood is going to be soft enough so I don't cause any damage to my ball joint. Now I'm just applying upward pressure. We want to have the suspension in approximately the same height as if the vehicle was on the ground. Once you feel as though you've gotten to that point, we're making our way to the rearward mounting hardware next. Rear hardware, same thing. I've got the anti-seize on the smooth shank. Now I'm resting this in my 19mm socket, and I have a large extension. We'll start coming up through underneath the subframe, through the bushing bracket. We may need to be able to twist and maneuver this, and that's what the extension's for, leverage. Now that we have that through there, I'm applying pressure, and that's forcing this into the down position. Now we have our inboard rear mounting bolt. We should be able to slide that up and through while everything's flat and flush. Now that I have the inboard bolt in place, let's go ahead and start on the mounting nut. That'll prevent that from falling on us. Let's continue on the outboard bolt now. For this mounting hardware, we're using a 19mm on the bolt head and a 21mm for each of our mounting nuts. We'll torque each of these to 103 foot-pounds. For the forward mounting bolts, we're using a 17mm for the bolt head and an 18mm for the mounting nut. The torque for this is going to be 70 foot-pounds. Now it's time for our pinch bolt. We still have pressure holding that control arm up. We need to confirm that the ball joint is properly seated before tightening the pinch bolt. Once you do have it snug, the torque for this is going to be 37 foot-pounds. Now we can remove support from underneath our lower control arm. Now we can install our axle nut. When installing the axle nut, you never want to use an impact tool. If you over-tighten this, you will cause damage to your bearing and possibly the axle. For this, you just want to use a hand ratchet or hand tool of some sort, and we'll go ahead and snug it up. Once you do have it snug, we'll get this closer to the ground so we can torque it to the proper torque specification. Now we have this in an area that we can start torquing it. To torque this, you can either have a second person inside of the vehicle pressing on the brake pedal, or you can have a pry bar like I have here. We're going to go diagonally across these studs all the way down to the ground. That's going to prevent this from turning on us while we continue on torquing this to 162 foot-pounds. Once you do have that torqued, go ahead and remove the bar. Now we're going to pay attention to our axle nut and the axle itself. Look at the axle. You can see that there's a rectangular slot. We're going to be using a hammer and punch to try to drive part of this nut down into that groove. That will prevent this from loosening up on us while we're driving down the road. Now, of course, we're going to make our way to the ball joint mounting nut next. We'll go ahead and remove that cotter pin. Just trim this. That just holds it in place for us so we don't lose that mounting nut. Let's go ahead and snug that up, and we're going to torque it to 29 foot-pounds. Continue on with your cotter pin. What we need to do here is pay attention to the slots on the mounting nut in comparison to the hole that makes its way through the stud of the ball joint. It needs to be aligned so we can install the locking cotter pin. If it's not, continue tightening until the very next slot is. Once you're sure it's properly aligned, continue on with your cotter pin. We'll just peen that over so there's no way this nut can loosen up on us while we're driving down the road. One last inspection in this area and we can reinstall our wheel. Once you have that in place, you're going to continue on with all 5 of your 19mm lug nuts. If you do have a locking lug nut, you want to use that as well. We'll start them on, snug them up. Get the wheel back on the ground, and the torque for each of these will be 90 foot-pounds. Now we have the wheel back on the ground, so we're going to torque these to that 90 foot-pounds in a crisscross manner. Okay friend, we finished our installation. The next thing you want to do is safely make your way down to your local alignment shop. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.